My cat has joined.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to have so many of y'all here for Abolition Ecology, Cultivating Multi-Species Justice. It's going to be a really fun event and we're going to learn a lot. So we have Lillie here. Lillie, would you like to introduce yourself a bit?
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. My name is Lillie Aissa. I am a French Tunisian ecological storyteller and climate activist based in the UK. And yeah, I do a lot of work around like political ecology, biocultural diversity, and kind of access to nature, multi-species justice, all those good things. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for today.
Okay, so let's start with our first question. How does the United States carceral system contribute to environmental harm and ecological damage? And what frameworks can be used to address this issue?
What a good question. Okay, well, I think there are so many ways, past, present, and future, a potential future, that the US carceral system contributes to ecological damage. I want to start off by saying this is a key concept for like the talk, is that social and the ecological are extremely linked, especially in our kind of very politicized environment day and age. So we're going to start in the past. So US policing and military has been responsible for so much socio-ecological harm, particularly to First Nations communities. So settlers acted as an early policing force, and they slaughtered up to 60 million bison in the Midwest, leaving only 325 in the wild. This led to the extermination of many native populations, as this was a vital lifeway for them, providing food, ecosystem services, and hide. There have been many other instances of the early police forces violently defending uneven development in the USA. So things like property relations, racial capitalism, and oppression of previously enslaved African Americans. These processes kind of provided the foundation for the socially and ecologically, uneven America that we see today. And today, we see police forces maintaining this same early socio-ecological order in the name of law and order. So unfortunately, there are countless examples of environmental racism in the USA, and a lot of it is upheld by or enabled by the police. So some examples which stand out to me are the countless oil pipelines on indigenous territories, Cancer Alley in Mississippi, and of course the recent Cop City proposal. These harms have undoubtedly affected humans, but as we sit in the web of more than human life, it affects everyone. So when pipelines are built, community gardens are shut, and more land is paved over for car infrastructure, multi-species communities suffer as a result. And yeah, some frameworks I would like to use for this are racial capitalism, systems theory, and the concept of a bad Anthropocene. So in this Anthropocene era we're in, humans and our systems are shaping life on Earth. Currently, we are operating under a bad Anthropocene. However, I believe abolition ecology gives us a chance to shift to a renewal ecology where we have real multi-species justice for those most harmed by racial capitalism. Thanks.
You are so brilliant. So our next question is, what are abolition ecologies? Because as the title of our talk, kind of defining that term.
Yeah, so The term abolition ecology explores how racial capitalism is a key driver of environmental breakdown and uneven opportunity for communities of color. So ecological and carceral harms are extremely linked, and creating a genuinely livable future means questioning our current norms. So as for a definition, I'm going to use definition by Nick Kanan. I don't know if I said that right, but I believe he is the person who coined this term. Abolition ecology represents a novel approach through which to explore, unravel, and resist racial capitalism and environmental racism as interlocking and mutually generative systems, with an explicit focus on cities. So abolition ecology basically realizes the politicization of the environment. And as the environment provides the basic foundations for human life on Earth, unequal access to the environment often manifests as social issues, such as food insecurity, unequal access to ecosystem services. So as the temperature of the planet rises, we too have to rise up, and we have to confront unequal systems of power, oppression, and dominance which are harming us. Climate change acts as a multiplier. It worsens inequalities and it compounds the effects of systemic neglect and oppression. So this includes interrelated issues of environmental racism, police brutality, and violent business as usual practices. Dismantling the police means that we can achieve the livable future we deserve and protect our communities. The most marginalized communities have been at the front lines of both climate breakdown and police brutality. So it is vital to center these perspectives in every movement we build to cultivate real justice. This business as usual stance leads to climate delay at a critical point in Earth's history. This is quite literally the role of the police, to maintain the way things are, no matter how harmful these systems are to us. In the global south, this manifests as indigenous communities being unalived for protecting their land against fossil fuel extraction and now lithium. And in the global north, it takes the form of imprisoning and deporting climate protesters, such as Marcus Decker from Just Stop Oil. Both forms of policing keep the fossil fuel machine running and prevent us from enacting the radical change we need for a livable future. Abolition ecology is an incredibly creative way to reimagine our social infrastructures and our ecosystems. Currently, the USA spends over 180 billion annually on policing and carceral infrastructures. This number is predicted to rise as social inequalities and crime rise and worsen under the climate crisis, and governments worldwide repress their people. We are constantly told that we don't have money for ecological restoration, green jobs, social issues, fair wages, but there's clearly some potential for this, some co-creative potential. I think it's really time to get serious about reimagining the state of our world.
Amazing. Okay. Abolitionists, forest defenders, and community members have been organizing to stop Cop City in Atlanta and to defend the Wellesley forest. How do organizers form coalitions and take collective action in defense of their environmental futures?
I'm going to start off by saying I am extremely proud of those who have mobilized and are continually mobilizing against Cop City in Atlanta. And although this has been a completely tragic state of affairs, I think it has helped people connect the dots between policing, brutality, and environmental degradation. I want to say rest in peace and power, Manuel Tortuguita Terán, an activist who was shot over 50 times for defending the forest against state violence. I think coalitions are incredibly important during this time, and thankfully, due to social media, they are easier than ever, especially across borders, as we're doing now. So I'd say they're almost like the mycelial fabric, which kind of recognizes that our struggles are linked. And I really admire US environmental justice activists, actually, because I think the way they kind of weave together the social and ecological is really incredible, and I've drawn a lot of inspiration from it. For example, some of the community gardens I worked with discussed many social and ecological issues such as food apartheid, extinction of experience, and invasive plants. I think there's something really beautiful that happens when we realize that our struggles are different but linked. And if our struggles are interlinked, so are the solutions. And it shows that we have so much collective power to create a better world that works for us all.
Great. In your recent installment of your newsletter, Love Letters to Landscapes, you write about sustainable cultural practices and ancestral traditions of North African peoples, such as nomadic farming, sharing food with neighbors, and lining streets with fruit trees. You write that cultural preservation is environmental preservation. Can you expand on the links between cultural preservation and environmental preservation?
Yeah, I'd love to. So nature teaches us that diversity is key to life, survival, and thriving on Earth. I think this extends to human cultures and societies and the vastly different lifeways which have served humanity for so long. Human cultures emerged from locally specific ecology, forming regional languages, cuisines, crafts, and lifeways. Indigenous and global South societies have recognized this for a long time and lived lives which we today might call sustainable. It's kind of coincided with colonization that species, cultures, and cultural practices have went extinct or been threatened. This is because Western capitalism has been imposed on global majority communities. Instead of viewing the environment as an extension of us and as a part of our culture, we have slowly been conditioned to, we've slowly been conditioned to view it as a resource, a business opportunity, and something to be pillaged and used solely for our benefit. So to draw on my Tunisian heritage and this North African context, I use the concept of biocultural diversity. So biocultural diversity is the co-occurrence of linguistic, cultural, and biological diversity. The original peoples of the land, Tunisia, were Amazigh. They were very in touch with the land and all the species that inhabited it. They lived in pluralistic communities composed of multiracial and multi-ethnic tribes. So there was people of all religions, all races. They had a lot more multi-species entanglements as they are nomadic farmers. Over successive colonizations and social deaths, the practices of tattooing, earth-based rituals, and self-sufficiency were labeled as haram and backwards, as Tunisia attempted to align itself more with Western capitalist beliefs and systems. And the reason why I am unfortunately saying this in past tense is because the Amazigh culture and people are almost extinct. They are very endangered in Tunisia. But I feel like a way to preserve our culture, land, and species is to protect these ancient lifeways. So, for example, through learning more about ancestral olive tree cultivation, reviving ancient tattoo iconography, and teaching Tamazight to the youth, as Morocco is doing. I think there's definitely ways of reviving these old traditions if we act now.
How does Eurocentrism and Westerncentrism limit the climate movement? Which perspectives are often missing from conversations about climate?
So I would say a big problem is the kind of mindset that underpins a lot of Eurocentric climate movements. So I think through grounding itself in colonial ideas of science, rationality, and progress, it can often look for tech fixes and solutions that serve the West alone. Although I do believe in science, and I think a lot of the models are extremely accurate. I'm more talking about carbon capture, carbon offsets, and electric vehicles, I think are three prominent examples for me. So they are presented as the only solution, and it really ignores the realities that global South and Indigenous communities are facing worldwide, and all that they have faced historically in the name of human progress and advancement. So in reality, just climate transitions and solutions are complex, locally specific, and culturally specific. So this might be quite a complex answer, but we have to make room for real community-led change and conversation. So this looks like localized energy and food systems, dependent on context, environment, and the needs of the people. It looks like environmental education for children, cultural preservation, and restoration of landscapes. It looks like disability justice, community healing, and abolition, so that we can move through this all together with our communities. Instead of going fast, fast, fast in the name of progress, I feel like we need to take everyone with us and refuse to leave anyone behind. Western green capitalism serves the West. It allows Europeans to drive around in electric vehicles while surrendering the rest of the world as a carbon offset. And people are increasingly starting to wake up to this reality. In refusing to acknowledge multiple perspectives, history repeats itself, and historically neglected places and people continue to be sacrificed while others get the chance to undergo a green transition. I would say too many perspectives are often missing from conversations around climate. Some of these include Global South, Indigenous communities, disabled people, working class communities, refugees, mothers. I would say it's only recently that environmentalism has been coupled with politics, but even then, it often centers Western politics. What we need is solidarity, coalitions, and genuinely intersectional perspectives. And if that sounds depressing, I just want to say this is not a reason to not get involved. In fact, it demonstrates the need to have many more people represented and collectively shaping our future. So I would say we can recognize the flaws with the current Eurocentric movements, but that is a sign to go harder and to get more people on board. So I wouldn't say this to dissuade anyone from joining and from being an environmentalist. We absolutely should be environmentalists.
How are non-Western approaches to environmentalism currently being implemented? And what could the UK and the US learn from these approaches? Additionally, how can communities engage in cross-cultural collaboration in designing strategies for climate resilience?
I would say that the Brazilian president, Lula, has been really great for this recently. So I feel as though he has really valorized Indigenous people and their sovereignty over land, refusing to sacrifice the Amazon for global capitalist infrastructure. And this is so important because in the IPCC report, colonialism was named as a key driver and Indigenous people are named as a key solution. So offering full sovereignty is, I'd say, a huge step in the right direction. And in India, there's a state of Assam, and they noticed problems of rural illiteracy and a massive waste problem. So they kind of created a system where school children kind of recycle, and that's like their school fees. So it kind of tackles the social problems along with the ecological challenges, which is really amazing in training kids in green things. And the Pacific Islands and their legal litigations. So lately they have been conducting a lot of world-leading treaties, such as the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, and recently a moratorium on deep-sea drilling in their waters. So I would say all of these communities just boil down for just a sense of willing to reject capitalist notions of development. They kind of truly embed themselves in the web of life and realize what harms us harms all of us. And on the flip side, what regenerates us regenerates our more than human communities. Yeah.
As a French Tunisian ecological storyteller, how has your identity influenced your career?
I would say my identity has massively shaped my career. So being a third culture kid meant that I was kind of always on the margins. I was always looking in and able to shift from one perspective to the next. Yeah, so being Tunisian has given me a deep rooted connection to the Amazigh people and their life ways. So yeah, and also it's taught me a lot about colonization. So my grandparents and my mother struggled a lot with kind of colonial systems, both in Tunisia and France. And it's given me kind of great joy to be able to learn more about Tunisia, North Africa, and hopefully, yeah, create some great environmental change there. Being French, obviously there's a history of protest, coalition building, and solidarity, which I think has definitely informed my politics and my career. And being born and raised in the UK has given me a sense of being in like a global village. So I really understood the incredible position of diaspora and how we are very well placed to be able to connect with our roots, but also access resources. So this is kind of the work which I'm very much leaning into.
Amazing. How have your experiences and knowledge shaped your perspective on the role of marginalized communities in combating the climate crisis?
Well, thank you. My lived experiences of being a marginalized person from a working class background have definitely shaped my perspective. So I feel like my positionality really has shaped how I show up in these spaces. I try and center care, solidarity, and oneness in everything I do. I firsthand have experienced a lot of barriers to participation in environmental movements, from normalized bigotry to unpaid labor, to sexual harassment, to eco-fascism and racism within movements. I unfortunately could talk for hours about this. And I just want to say that this is what I've experienced as someone who is, in a lot of contexts, white passing. So I try and use my in-betweenness to crack open the door and pass the mic to other communities and to try and change this for the better.
You conducted research about biocultural diversity in New York City's community gardens. Can you explain some of the findings you made in your research?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'd say probably the top finding is how essential community gardens are to supporting more than human communities in the Anthropocene. So I feel like they are absolutely vital infrastructure for food security, for education, for nature connectedness, for mental health. Absolutely, we need to protect and expand our community gardens and make sure they are very well resourced so we can transform our food system and give nature a space to live in urban cities and give people a chance to gather and connect. I also found out how nature and culture are extremely co-created, even in urban landscapes. So when I met a lot of community gardeners who were diaspora, and they were growing plants from back home and telling me the most incredible stories about their kind of lineage. And yeah, it was really incredible. And I was even in some communities which didn't have access to like the environment like that, but they still had so much nature imagery. So I really, really solidified that link between nature and culture in my mind. And I would also say that I learned about the changing role and responsibility of public institutions to cultivate and communicate biocultural diversity to the public. So, as well as community gardens, I also visited a couple of museums, botanical gardens, and I was really happy to see that there's this ongoing conversation around nature and culture. And I think it needs to be amplified, and we really, as a society, need to understand how intertwined they are.
Wonderful. What are some of the challenges in translating scientific research into actionable environmental policies?
So I think we increasingly need creative science communication. A lot of the public don't know that much about environmental issues, climate change, or more than human life. And on the flip side, many researchers, scientific communities, and activists can be totally out of touch with everyday life, cultural specificities, and regular communities. So I think there's a need to bridge this chasm with creative, collaborative science communication.
How can policymakers effectively navigate the complexities of scientific information and balance it with other considerations?
I would say it's really important to include traditional ecological knowledge of Indigenous and Global South communities. For so long, they've been excluded from science despite knowing a lot. So, but I'm happy that things seem to be changing, and increasingly scientists and ecologists are working with Indigenous communities to learn more about ecosystems. I would also say art and culture can be very effective tools to kind of disseminate why certain policies are important to the public. So I'd highly advocate that. And I'd also say that somatics and emotional support are increasingly important in an era of polycrises. So it's really important for for people's different backgrounds to be considered and what they might need to understand and contribute to policies.
In what ways do you think college and university students can effectively engage in political activism, particularly regarding climate justice, and inspire legislative change?
So youth have always led social movements, and I think the young people of today are incredibly politically engaged, which makes me happy. I would say there is no one size fits all. Activism takes many shapes and forms and is often very specific to different groups of people. I would say that I feel like our political climate feels very dense and very heavy right now. And for that reason, I think there definitely needs to be more pleasure activism. So this is activism which kind of meets our needs, meets our wants, and allows us to work towards what we want rather than shouting about what we don't want, if that makes sense. Although I think we do still need to shout about what we don't want. Although the climate movement is incredible in so many ways, some mainstream narratives can really succumb to doomism. And I think this doesn't leave enough room for our joy, our hope, and all the things which make us human. It's essential to create spaces which advocate for justice while cultivating care, joy, and human connection despite struggle, as we've always done. I'm really inspired by the growing wave of climate justice fundraisers in the UK, such as Club Soul. And as Emma Goldman said, it's not my revolution if I can't dance. So in short, I would say that we need to weave in our hopes, dreams, and intricacies into the movements to make them more comfortable places which really serve us. Yeah.
Great. You've done freelance work for nonprofit organizations such as the World Wildlife Fund UK and Slowways. What have you learned about the nonprofit field, and what advice do you have for students considering a career in social impact work?
I would start with the positives and say that the work is incredibly fulfilling. You meet some incredible change makers, and it is a great feeling tackling some of the biggest issues of our time with amazing people and brilliant opportunities, which there are more and more of emerging. However, there are huge barriers to equitable and paid work in the sector. This is not necessarily about these organizations I've worked with. However, the social justice and environmental movements as a whole. Young people are often expected to work for free or for very little compensation. This work is also very emotionally draining and creatively demanding, and it deserves compensation and benefits, just like any other job. So I would advise choosing opportunities which you're passionate about and fairly rewarded for. I'd say this looks so different for everyone. For some people, it might be expenses paid. It might be, like exposure once in a while. But I would say try and make sure that you are clear about what you want, what you will accept, and what you won't.
Thank you. During New York City Climate Week this year, tens of thousands rallied together in the March to End Fossil Fuels. How can individuals push for corporations to be held accountable for ecological damage? And additionally, how can individuals take steps to reduce their own carbon footprint?
Okay, so individuals can push corporations in many ways, such as protest, raising awareness, and campaigns to remove the social license these companies need to operate. So if companies' investments are largely met with backlash and kind of they're jeopardized, these investments become very risky and sometimes they can't operate. This is what many organizers, activists, and campaigners are attempting to do with fossil fuel companies as well as their investors. So several trillion dollars of money has been divested successfully from fossil fuel companies, which is amazing. So as for other corporations and big business, I advocate for boycotting where possible and utilizing alternative infrastructures. So I'm really inspired by the work and conversations of Healing Justice London and the Rehearsing Freedom talks. They talk about the need for kind of creating the infrastructure you want to see in the world instead of showing up sporadically in a very reactionary way. Although there is a need for that, it's also really powerful to kind of build alternative futures as well alongside it so people can have choices. My participation at the Eden Project Food Futures program taught me the importance of land use, food systems, and localized small-scale climate solutions. Although I believe personal carbon footprints are largely used to lessen the blow of corporations' impact, we can try and reduce our dependence on globalized extractive systems in a lot of things we do. So there are a growing amount of community energy projects and initiatives which save money and the planet, as well as localized food systems. These climate solutions can often work out more affordable and efficient, especially with public support and mass buy-in. So that's when a lot of people support it and are using that infrastructure. So this grassroots infrastructure is vital to invest our money and energy into, as they provide alternative options for living and creating healthier societies as a whole. So things like veg boxes and community small-scale energy projects are really incredible, I think.
Amazing. Okay. The United States is notorious for its poor infrastructure. Compared to other countries, particularly in Europe and East Asia, the United States lacks reliable public transportation, walkable cities, etc. How do you think we could imagine the US landscape, and what steps can communities take to rewild their cities?
I believe that, yes, the USA unfortunately does suffer from very poor infrastructure, and it leaves many of its people locked into toxic and degenerative interlocking systems such as big food, the fossil fuel industry, and the car industry. These infrastructures are also often dependent on capital or lack thereof. This leaves many people in survival mode and locked out of everyday life, such as unhoused people, people in rural areas, and working class people. I feel like initially There should be some locally specific research, and urban planning could be a great help to many US communities locked into poor infrastructure. Through assessing the difficulties, needs, and desires, we can help each community adapt and evolve in ways that benefit them. With this kind of thing, it's really important to have bottom-up approaches, beginning with some of the most disenfranchised communities, such as unhoused and disabled people. This method of feminist urban planning really helps tackle accessibility and spatial flaws while improving the circumstances for everyone. For example, anti-homeless architecture affects us all, and through abolishing it and coming up with better alternatives, public spaces can become more welcoming and accessible to all. So there's several like actionable sites of reimagining, I would say. So yeah, as I said, like the a just energy transition, so kind of community-led, depending on the kind of geography of the area. Does it have a lot of sun? Does it have a lot of wind? Does it have a bit, which kind of infrastructure can it support, basically? And how can communities create this? And a just food transition. So urban food gardens can provide so many co-benefits, such as lessening the urban heat island effect, providing food security and nutrition, nature education, and refuge for multi-species communities. There have been loads of these popping up in the US, which is really incredible to see, such as in Detroit and Baltimore. So it's really incredible. This is more tricky, but trying to halt and reverse car infrastructure and campaign and lobby for more affordable public transport. And I would say a massive issue underpinning this all is discussion and consultation with Indigenous peoples on restoration. So asking for their help on things like native species and also returning land to these affected people so we can restore nature as much as possible.
Okay, thank you so much. So that's the last of the prepared questions, and we're going to transition into a Q&A to give attendees some time to ask any questions that emerged from our discussion, and then we'll follow that with some closing remarks.
I'm just gonna ask a question. Oh, unless Liz wants to go. I couldn't figure out how to turn my hand on, so I was like, I'm just gonna ask. But Liz, you can go.
I was muted. Okay, never mind. That's so silly goofy. Okay, really nice to hear from you. Apologies if you already addressed this like earlier because I was like sort of in and out communicating with some people about like an emergency, but so like what are your thoughts on how much we can actually use the current like global Western infrastructure to that like is meant to address climate change, like for example like COP26, COP27, stuff like that, like global climate talks, the UN, how much work can be done there? How much of it is just like damage control? How much does Indigenous representation really matter in spaces like that when ultimately they're not going to make a difference in the end, in the sort of conclusions that these spaces come to?
Yeah, I would say, sorry if this is such a wishy-washy answer. I don't know, because like honestly, I've been having these debates in my mind. I'm part of a climate activist speaking cohort, and a lot of people from the global south and going to COP, and I'm not sure. I think legal, I mean, I know I said abolition, but it's going to be a process. I think Western nations really need some legally binding kind of laws and things to make them transition and to make polluters pay. But I'm not 100% sure because a lot of that, I'm not even sure it would emerge out of these big events. I think it would happen kind of as a result of lots of communities rallying together. And I think COP and the UN and stuff have some serious issues with like letting fossil fuel lobbyists be there. So I'm really unsure of how much these events really mean. I don't know. I don't know if that sounds bad to say, but I don't know what they mean. Like I'm just like, a couple of COPs ago, I think I just thought, okay, well, I think we're just gonna have to try and save ourselves. Like, yeah, I'm not sure.
So my question for you, you mentioned a long while ago, you just mentioned the term pleasure activism, which I know is from Adrienne Marie Brown. And then also you were mentioning other like young activists. Who do you look for inspiration in yourself and your work? And also who do you young people in your field who you think are doing good work that provide good like representations for young activists of like, this is how you can get started?
Okay, so I would say there's certain, I'm a geography graduate, and there's certain authors which I was like, oh my gosh. So Donna Haraway is incredible. She is a feminist multi-species geographer, and I'm currently reading her book. Oh my gosh, I can't remember the name, but I think it's her most recent book, and it's about staying with the struggle. So it's talking about multi-species relationships, and it's actually shifting from the Anthropocene idea to the idea that we are kin, like we are more than human life existing on the same planet. And the best way to actually enact change is to see it that way, instead of these kind of nature culture binaries and technological fixes and advancements and masculine like knowledge systems, which are basically, she said, what stories make stories matter. That might be a bit of a tongue twister, but it's really important that we kind of just try and really shift the way we're thinking, and then the way we're moving, the way we're acting, even if it's not like immediate results, even if it's not tangible, if that makes sense. Sorry, I got carried away. I also like David Harvey. He's a really great urban geographer. The field of cultural geography is really incredible. And as for people in my field, so I've been recently having a bit of thoughts about this. There are definitely like prolific climate activists, but I am becoming disengaged with this idea personally, because although I really want to reward the people doing great work, I think a lot of the people doing great work are not those who are even acknowledged at all. I think it's like, for me, it's just like random people I meet at protests. My friend who runs Club Soul, which is like a sustainable night out. It's just the incredible people I meet and I've met along my journey, like the urban gardeners I met in New York City. Like, these people will never be on like, I don't know, like Forbes 30 under 30, but to me they are absolutely incredible. So yeah, I'd say that. Although there are definitely amazing people doing it, I also feel like it's a bit counterintuitive to say this person's they're everything, because in reality we need each other, like.
I'm just gonna ask another question. So because you talked about how like a lot of the times like the best climate activists are the one who aren't openly being acknowledged. And in like, I guess in organizing spaces, there's a lot of discourse in general about like, oh, what happens when an NGO or like, sort of a grassroots organizing movement gets too big and gets too much like national recognition and attention, and then gets sort of co-opted. And I'm not as involved right now in like climate organizing, but like I've heard some things about like the Sunrise Movement, for example, and like just like sort of people saying that, oh, like it's exposing too much up to like donors, and like, oh, they're like tokenizing a lot of like Black and brown activists. I mean, what can you say to organizations like that, and how how people can be engaged in like climate action locally, you know, or on a larger scale, in a way that doesn't facilitate, I guess, sort of more problematic spaces like that?
Yeah, 100%. I'd say, first of all, I think we all need to have grace and recognize that it's truly crazy times we're living in. Like, I don't know, like even the idea of myself being a like sponsored climate activist, it's like it's giving Hunger Games, honestly. So like this is really an insane timeline that we're living on, first and foremost. And yeah, I'd say it's so difficult because I think in order for organizations to get resources, they kind of have to market themselves, and in order for individuals to get resources, they kind of have to market themselves, and then they kind of have to become more engaged in like capitalism. I'd say just try and stay aligned, try and remember why, just try and remember your why, basically. Like yeah, and I'm not sure. I think it's so interesting because a lot of these questions are things which I'm grappling with myself, because I'm like, like on this way, like, yeah, but yeah, I think that's a really important debate right now. Yeah, let me know if anyone has any more questions.
I mean, I feel like you can't talk about climate activism without at least,
Yeah,
and
are we gonna have a conversation?
no, without mentioning Greta Thunberg. I feel like she's a very fraught figure, that's been very, very heavily politicized, and she's just this kid who just felt very strongly about climate change, and then it became a whole thing, and then she became tokenized, and then people started taking her too seriously. I mean, I don't know, like the thing about like organizing and sort of like having leaders of climate organizing just elected unprompted, you know, sometimes against their will, is like quite strange. But I mean, I don't know where I'm going with this, but like I don't, it's how do you see the future of youth climate organizing going? Like, because Greta Thunberg has in many ways become the face of youth organizing in a way that I don't particularly appreciate, even if I don't like I have anything against her personally.
Agreed.
Yeah, so like how do we shift the conversation?
I think there needs to be more focus on collaborations, coalition building, because right now it seems like there's a very small group of people who are completely exhausted, completely burned out, and it's kind of like, not to criticize, but as a result, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say the organizing is always successful, because the tank is running on zero. Like, I don't know. So I'd say the future is actually kind of getting more people engaged, which unfortunately I think they will, but I think it will be due to successful coalition building, but it will also be due to lived experience as climate disasters become more frequent. Like we've seen in New York yesterday, like it's it's affecting everyone now. So now I think people are realizing, but I think if we just try and build the most intersectional movements possible, and I think it's just more people, but more people doing less and having less work on their thing, maybe like less. I kind of feel like the prolific activism, I don't know if it's a trend or something, but I feel like it might be dying down, just because a lot of people seem to be kind of thinking, okay, it's one thing for someone to be paid to be an activist or to receive resources or funding, but it's another thing of like, I don't know, complete idolizing and saying you're, and I think I've spoken to some kind of high up activists, and they themselves are uncomfortable with it. So hopefully we can shift away from that and just turn into more ordinary people doing things. But I think it also starts with science communication and people getting more communication about like what people actually can do. So like, for example, like lobbying or like community gardening, or like there's loads of different ways people can show up, or just making more non-climate things climate related. I think it's just a big thing that's going to help. Like a Green New Deal would help. But yeah, I mean, if anyone has any more questions.
Not a question, but just a thank you again for speaking with us today. You're very well spoken, as can be expected. And you've just had very wonderful insights. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been really, really interesting. And yeah, I did a bit of research in like the US and stuff. So like I feel like I had a lot of information about kind of American climate justice. So I'm really happy that it's fallen on happy ears. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I also want to thank you for speaking with us today. It's been really great. Even across time zones, we were able to pull this off, which is amazing. And yeah, thank you so much for all the preparation and work you put into researching all of this and getting a really informative and great talk over. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Lillie. Really appreciate your insight.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great I was about to say have a great evening, but have a great day. Good evening here. Take care. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming, everyone. Bye-bye.